Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of my story. I'm not going to be educating everybody this afternoon. I'm not going to be inspiring you, although you might feel inspired. And I'm not going to show you naked pictures. Although I will claim to be the guy who described himself with one word as sexy. I was the guy who said that. And you could plainly tell why. So the title of my talk is, I Don't Know, Why Don't You Ask Jim? Or Have You Asked Jim? And so the only way that makes any sense is if we go back and I tell you a little bit about the story of how RBB, our company, came about and the story. I'm going to be sharing with you hard-earned lessons that I learned personally. I'm just sharing today. Lessons that I learned from both sides of the leadership transition, and that'll make more sense as I just tell you the story. So in 1973, RBB was founded by three men, the R, the B, and the B. And we're out in Amish country, Ohio, down in Holmes County. It's a beautiful place, rolling hills and farmland, and it's just gorgeous down there, about 3.5 hours south of here. We were founded as a full-service provider of all things electrical and electronics. So we designed things, we wrote software, we built electrical panels, we went out into the field and did service, we built large machines, all of that stuff. We even built circuit boards as they were coming into being in the 80s. I came in the year 2000. There was one founder, one B still involved. He was the president of the company at the time. And I was an outside hire, an operations guy who came out of corporate America. I worked for Avery Dennison. You might be familiar with Avery Dennison, the hello, my name is people, Avery. And I wasn't family, and I did not come out of the electronics industry. I had worked also at a ceramic tile business, a small family ceramic tile business in Canton, Ohio as well. So the two things I wanted to share were, the two transitions were from B to me and from me to Jim. Now, from B to me. In 1999, so just before I got hired, the company had gone from a very stable $8 million business to a $16 million business in less than 2 years, and then back down to $7 million after the tech bubble burst in 2000, 2001. Okay, and I was hired in the middle of that growth spurt before we realized it was going to be short-lived. That spike was due primarily to one customer that went from 5 to 50% of our business within that time period. Now, all of you entrepreneurs in the room are already feeling sick, right? Now, why would you do that, number one? And number two, how could you do that? Right? So the answer to that question is they paid in 10 days. They paid their bills in 10 days, and they were willing to help us finance it. And that's why our owner decided to go ahead and take the chance to ride this. Well, of course, it came back and bit us, but that's how we were able to do it. In order to support this customer, we had to borrow heavily. B and his managers borrowed heavily, naturally, and we bought all kinds of equipment, and we moved into a new facility. So it raised our fixed costs significantly. You can see where this is going, right? Okay. When the bottom fell out and all that volume kind of disappeared on us, we were left with virtually no cash. We had a massive pile of now unusable inventory of parts, and the company was severely threatened. I mean, just severely threatened from every. And then one afternoon, the bank called, and they called our notes. Now, B, who had been running the company since 1973, was already exhausted and had already been looking for a replacement or a successor anyway. And he and I had been talking about making that transition someday into the future. But at this point, when the bank called our notes, that was it. We were told by the bank that the sheriff would be coming for the keys to our building in about a week. So, since my customer, the one I was hired to help manage the growth through all of that, was the one who caused this financial crisis, and I was unable to stop it, I figured I was out of a job, which is the natural consequence of that. But instead of that, I offered to help lead us through the crisis. So I had to make the very uncomfortable but ultimately practical decision or recommendation that we slash the workforce dramatically for the first time since '73. We had never really done that. And we would not have been in this position had we not ridden this train to its natural end. But nevertheless, it was very difficult. And B himself was not in a emotional or professional place to be able to do that. It just violated too many of his own personal values. He couldn't do it. So I volunteered to help lead that restructuring. Also, at the same time while I was doing that, I had to call the suppliers and talk them down off the ledge, because if they didn't keep shipping us parts for the orders that we still had, we couldn't ship and we couldn't invoice, and we would run out of money that much faster and the whole thing would fall apart. And of course, we had to figure out how to finance ourselves. So we found a new bank and we're able to get really creative. One of the things that's nice about living out into the country was that we went to the USDA, not just the SBA, but the USDA, because we're in a farm community, and we were able to get them to underwrite a loan package for us. And there's nothing like a major crisis to help you find all the resources that might be out there for you. Yeah, so we all of our techies kind of looked like farmers that day when we went to apply. But. All right. So we kept the sheriff away. We didn't have to worry about that anymore. And then 9/11 happened. Right, so a month later then, B finally said, Bruce, I'd like you to take over the business as president. And I said, thanks. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. So B took on the role of CEO and backed away not an inch. So he didn't move out of his office. He didn't change anything. He could still call all the staff meetings, but I was now the president, which made him feel better. And I felt better too, but nothing much had changed. As signs of good faith from my side, and some questionable judgment, I would have to admit in hindsight, I bought into the company at that point. There were 10% of the shares that 10% of the shares were sitting in the treasury, and I said, okay, nobody owns them, I'll buy those. And the company, on paper, they were worthless because the company was upside down. But I had this unbelievable faith, unshakable faith in RBB's future. The mojo, the feelings within the organization, the culture was already awesome. Plus, I'm a sucker for a lost cause. And I know you guys, as many of my peer entrepreneurs are also, when you see something that is impossible or it's really hard to accomplish, or you can't see your way through it, that just really fires you up and says, man, I could do something, right, with that? Well, that's me. All right, so 6 months later, I moved my family from Akron, population 200,000, to Shreve, Ohio, which none of you have heard of, population 1,500. One of my daughters was a freshman in high school, so she punished us for a good long year. Right, for that? She got farm. Dad, where are we going? Mars? So anyway, we got out there and we over the next 4 years, we dug out, right? We tightened our belts to our spinal cord. We couldn't spend any money on capital equipment while many of our competitors were doing that. We stabilized the organization and started to pay off our debts. Got the cash flowing little bit by little bit. But the truth was we were floundering strategically. We really were just a Me Too contract manufacturer. I never even told you what we do. I told you about what we started to do. But by the time this time period came around, 2001, 2002, we were doing mostly printed circuit board assembly. Okay, that's what we did. Most of what we still did a little design, we still did a little service, but the lion's share of what we did was printed circuit board assembly. All right, so, let's see, where am I? Okay. Also, even though cash was flowing and we were paying off our debts as we went, we were only doing about 0 to 2% profitability every year. And we were working way too hard with way too much stress. We're always 90 days away from going out of business. You've been there during cycles. Well, our cycle lasted for 5 or 6 years. And I was getting exhausted myself, and I could just see the future or the past repeating itself. And during that period now, even though the business was really continuing to really just kind of stay on its knees, pay its bills, but not be a whole lot of fun, within the organization, some really good things were happening. We put an ERP system in. Good mojo was starting to happen. We started to build trust within the organization. It was really starting to be fun. And B and I developed this really strong relationship where he began to really trust me as a person and as a professional. So in 2005, I was named CEO, and then we put founder on his business card. And then he didn't give up his office. I thought, oh man. I thought if he could just take the role. Now, I love him, and I still love him, and we're still good friends, but I was really hoping that would be the end of it. In 2007, finally, we created a buyout agreement where we actually could orchestrate the beginning of the end. So I have a few thoughts for the next generation successors. So people who are coming up through the organization and are taking over from a founder. Again, this is not education, this is not theory, this is just my experience. Okay, let me just share a few things. One, build a relationship. The most important thing, nothing else matters if you don't have a relationship with the founder or the owners above you. Okay, if that's not there, and we could talk afterwards about how that's done or what happened in my case, how that was able to happen. Secondly, respect the founder's risk, their knowledge, okay, and their blood, sweat, and tears. If the founder understands that you are more for you than for the business and that you don't really respect what they came and did for the organization, then you're the one off base, not them, no matter how good or altruistic your intentions. Thirdly, you personally have to address the biggest challenges of the organization. We don't live on planet Fair. It doesn't matter whose job it is. If you're the successor, if you're the person who the organization looks to or the founders look to take over eventually, then you got to be the one who calls that supplier and say, we're going to pay every bill. I don't know when exactly, but I'll call you next week and I'll tell you when the next check is coming. And that's got to be on you. And that, no matter how difficult that is, so I don't know what the biggest challenges are in your organization, but you got to be that guy or gal. Okay. Fourthly, lower your pain tolerance. I carried way too much pain tolerance. You know, we don't get awards, leaders. We don't get awards for how much pain we can endure. We don't. Nobody says, hey, you know, that guy really is willing to go through hell. That's not, we don't get awards for that. But yet we somehow tell ourselves that I can take it, I can take it. But we're not doing ourselves or the company much of a favor if in that case, right? So lower your pain tolerance. Go to the icky place with your company, with yourself, look in the mirror, figure out what those issues are and deal with them. Don't just tolerate them. And again, I say that because I did it. Finally, honor and respect the past, but don't live in it. It can be very easy to be sucked into the worldview of the previous generation, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we're encouraged to do that by all the wonderful founders and owners out here. But we as the next generation can't be driven solely into fitting within that vision such that we're not bringing new value, new energy, new life, new challenges, because that's what we bring. And if we're not bringing it, we're not adding value, we're not really helping the organization. And also, the last thing I wanted to say for that generation of folks is bring a personal commitment. In my case, it was moving my family out the middle of nowhere. I'm not suggesting that you need to, but put some skin in the game. Show that first generation that you are willing to take some risk and that it matters as much to you as it does to them. All right. Now, hopefully there'll be some time for questions at the end. Now I'm moving on to part two, which is I had a Popeye moment. What I call my Popeye moment. Popeye, when I was a kid, Popeye was a big deal. And Popeye always said, you know, that's all I can stands, I can't stands no more, right? That's before he actually got his spinach and went off and took care of business. So I finally got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. I realized that B's shadow, not in a bad way, but B's shadow had influenced me in ways I only understood after he actually left. Does that make any sense? That I was more worried in some cases about his okayness than about what was the right next step to do for the health of the business. And maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm just too nice of a guy, too much of a people pleaser, but that can be really confusing. And one of the ways we get better is by sharing all this stuff with each other, so I'm just sharing my experience. I was carrying the stress of the underperformance of the company more than B was, and yet I was more worried about his okayness than fixing it, and I was getting mentally and physically exhausted. I knew I was in the right place with the right ideas. So I kept saying to myself, if I make this move or if I make this change, how's he going to be? Is B going to be all right? Is he going to be emotional? Is he going to torpedo what I'm trying to do? So I would spend all this time trying to make him okay by having one-to-ones, building trust here. Meanwhile, the organization is still kind of floundering. It was exhausting. So in the summer of 2007, I took 6 weeks off. I couldn't take it anymore. I took 6 weeks off. I didn't go anywhere, just went home to re-energize and gain some clarity. And while I was away, and only because I was away, I was able to get clear on three things. First, we had to exit every single unprofitable slice of our business right now. We were doing all these different things, but we weren't able to. So what we did was we focused exclusively on built-to-print products, and we also decided to focus only on small batches. And in contract manufacturing, that's a little crazy because they're a high hassle factor. It's hard to make money, but once you can figure it out, it's pretty much open season because it's an underserved part of the marketplace, and that's what we decided to do, or at least that's what I intended to do at that point of the game. I also decided to manage by my values, our values as a company, and by profits, and also that had to happen right now. Without excuse, apology, blame, or grudge. We just had to do it. And if it's not this, if we're not going to do this, it's time for me to go because I'd given everything I could do. You know, so I met with B. I came back, and when I returned, I didn't give him an ultimatum, but I basically shared those three truths with him that came to me. And it was high risk either way. If we stayed on the course or if we changed course, it was going to be high risk. And I asked him to support the plan, or what I did was I pulled the keys out of my pocket, my car keys. It was just the two of us in the conference room, and I just very casually slid them across the table. And I said, one of us has to drive. It's clear to me that we've both been trying to drive. It's okay with you. It's okay with me if you want to drive. I'll give you 6 months' notice if you want to take it over. I'm not going to leave you in alerts. Plus, I live out here in the middle of nowhere. There's nobody else hiring, so it'll take me that long to find a job. But anyway, I'll give you 6 months' notice. Let me know. And I sat there in silence until praying to God those keys would be, slid back across the table. Well, obviously, I'm standing here today, so they were slid back across the table. But it was a little dicey there for a little while. He understood that kind of clarity was necessary, and we did it. Okay, so in October of 2007, I read Small Giants for the first time. And I sensed RBB's potential for small gianthood very early. But I had no language or name for it until I read that book. So thank you, Bo, for writing that book. It also gave me a big boost of confidence that I was on the right track, that values and profits were nothing to be apologized for, that there are other meaningful people who not only think about this but do it, and that I could do it too. And RBB, we could do it together. So by Christmas, we were underway. In 2008, he retired as founder and actually gave up his office. So after 32 years, he actually left, and like I said, we're still good friends today. So next move is from me to Jim. So real briefly, my thought here is that if we walk towards something, so now fast forward, it's 2014 or 2013, and I've decided to hire Jim because for lots of good reasons, it was time to have the company go to even higher level of performance. And I felt after 14 years of leadership that I had taken the company to a whole new place, but that in order to get to reach our potential, I might be the one in the way. I could help, but maybe I wanted to see if somebody else could take it even further. So my view was I knew that day was going to be coming, so what did I want to do? I know one of the reasons why B held on for so long was because there was nothing that he was walking towards in life. He was holding on because he was only thinking about walking away, and that was too hard. Since '73, this was his whole life, and he would say that every day. Well, how do you walk away from your whole life? You can't. So I consciously wanted to start a new business, a new venture. Walking towards something gives life. Walking away from something is so much harder to do when you're not walking towards something at the same time. If you're not familiar with the book Necessary Endings, I highly recommend that book. Many of us carry baggage all through life, whether it's a relationship, a job, a habit, a philosophy that no longer serves our best interest, and that's a great book to help you frame that question, et cetera. So I launched a new company called Building Trust in 2008, where I helped teams kind of get over their trust plateaus. We had done a lot of good work with Inside RBB, and I wanted to make that more available to other people. I can answer questions about that if we've got time later. I did some speaking gigs like I just did there really impressively, and I wrote my first book called On My Own, Recollections of an Unlikely CEO, which is available on Amazon if you want to go look that up, which tells very vulnerably tells the story of my childhood and why I didn't think I'd ever be in this kind of a position. So RBB's new approach came just in time. 2008, 2009, you all know what happened. We lost 30% of our revenue again. This time we actually made more money because we were more focused as a business and we had a better business model. But eventually, like I said, in 2013, we had reached another plateau and I brought in Jim. I decided to hire a general manager who was way smarter than me and had higher expectations for the business. On day one, Jim's first day, on my office wall, on my whiteboard, I wrote in big letters, "I don't know, have you asked Jim?" And Jim had the office next door, and when people would come to my office and they'd ask me the same kind of question they asked yesterday, I would say, and I would look over at my wall and I'd say, I don't know, have you asked Jim? Now, Jim just started in the morning, so Jim probably doesn't know much about the answer, but he is a smart guy and he can figure it out. And if he doesn't know and he wants my input, he knows where I work. So immediately from day one, I thought to myself, I am not putting Jim through what I went through. And so that's what that's about. You have to consciously give that authority over because the organization has so many well-worn paths to the chief executive, they're not even understood by you or the organization. And so you actually have to physically change the path. It can't come from the new guy. It's got to come from you, whoever's in charge, or again, theoretically in charge. Okay, so I consciously put Jim between myself and the employees, even though I had relationships with everybody, and I was, of course, very interested and keyed into what everybody was doing. I gave Jim authority and responsibility. I tried to stay involved without abdication. I didn't want to interfere, but I wanted to stay close. But I began to deliberately spend time away from the office on purpose, just to make sure that people understood, hey, Bruce trusts Jim, so maybe we can do so too. Let's go talk to Jim and let Jim figure it out. What they didn't understand was that Jim and I were in constant conversation, but it was offline and not so visible. And that infused Jim with a lot more authority. At least that was my intention. You have to ask Jim privately if that ever happened. Because my shadow is still around, obviously, so you have to ask Jim. Also, at the same time, I decided, since I haven't left yet, I had to, unlike the earlier transition, I had to decide what I wanted to keep for myself and write it down. Make sure it was perfectly clear. So things like the RBB DNA, which later became our core values, our brand voice, which I think I can still say more clearly than anyone else, and our company Mojo. So I even claimed the title of Director of Mojo. So I continue to think about ways we can have breakthrough changes for the organization, but I don't execute anything unless Jim asks me to. Today I'm down to 2 days a week at RBB, 2 days a week doing building trust work, and 1 day that's completely unallocated. Why? Again, I'm trying to build a future where I'm walking towards as opposed to letting go. My thoughts for founders and owners, and I'll wrap up. I should say that RBB is in great shape and in great hands, and while we're having, like any other manufacturer, we're always 90 days away from being out of business. That's become normal, and but I'm very excited about our future and all of that. So with all of that foundation there, here's the thing I want to say, and I've already said it a couple times, but for you owners and founders, envision and build a future for yourself first so you can let go more easily. Without that, it's going to be a lot harder. Can you do it? Of course. Liquidity events come, somebody comes with a big checkbook, and all of a sudden you find yourself out there without an answer. Those things happen all the time. I think Bo wrote a book about that. But I can say the more active you participate in your own planning, the better you're going to feel, and the more flexible you're going to feel about your future. I also want to suggest you put in what I call fingertip controls. Now, fingertip controls for me is one of them is a daily dashboard that I get every single day by 9 o'clock. It tells me, are we going to make money this month? What's the margin performance? What's been shipped? What's our inventory situation on one piece of paper? I'd be more than happy to share that with everybody in the room if you send me an email or work through him so I can show you what ours looks like. And that piece of paper is shared with every single person in the company, good news and bad, so we do a lot of open book management as well. We've gone past transparency to, yes, here's where we're going to make money or not. And so also do trailing 12-month charts, so I pay attention to the long-term trends. I do a lot of one-to-ones with Jim and a few others. And now, I said few others, not a few others. So I do a one-to-one, a targeted one-to-one if necessary, but rarely do I go within the organization to have a one-to-one. And now we've embarked on the EOS journey that many of you are aware of. And that helps me have more confidence to step away because I know there's a structure in place to help manage the business. All right. Again, work elsewhere. Got the end. Or is that 5 minutes? Is that 5 minutes or end? End? End. Okay. Wait a second. No, stop that. All right. All right. I missed the 5-minute cue. Sorry, folks. All right. So, coach, support, advise, and then hold your tongue. So you founders, coach, support, and advise, and then hold your tongue. Let them fail. Okay? You got to actively step back. You know, a lot of it's like watching somebody date your daughter, right? You know what happens, but you don't want to see it, right? You don't want to see it, folks. So have your say and then get out of town, okay? You don't want to see it, and that's what happens to a founder. They're so involved that they can't see it happening. You're right, you can't, so go away. Allow the new leader to fail. One of the things that Jim had to learn the hard way was that we are not a low-margin business. One way to increase sales, of course, is to get really aggressive on pricing. And Jim made that decision. I had some reservations, but I certainly wasn't going to override his strategy. Jim went ahead and did that and learned some really valuable lessons in the process that he was going to learn in no other way. Because if I said no, then he wouldn't have learned it. And we're still here, and he got a couple bruises, but that's okay, right? The business is still healthy. That's what hey, look, we all made mistakes. He's not going to take over unless he's lived through them as well. Deal with the icky things while they're still small, and refuse to make decisions your new leader can make. even despite the risks. So for the rest of the conference, I'm done now. So the rest of the conference, when you ask me questions, if my eyes glaze over and I give you an unfocused look and I kind of point at Jim, that's why. All right.